Okay, we've been writing simple programs, we're feeling good, we're reading input from the user, we're making calculations and printing output. But one of the things that we've seen is you can't always trust the user's input, right? Just because you ask for an integer doesn't mean they're going to give you an integer. So for example, let's say we want to ask the user to enter an integer, let's say between 1 and 5. Obviously we're going to need our scanner class here, our trusty scanner. We're going to read from system in, and we're going to ask them to enter a number. We're going to store that into an integer, and we're going to read it in with our scanner. Now obviously they may or may not enter the correct input, and this is where exception handling is going to come into play. Let's go ahead and loop this so that we continue to ask for input if the input is not within the range that we want. So we'll go ahead, we'll run this, we'll test this with various inputs. If they enter an integer that's outside the range, things seem to be working just fine. But of course, once they start to enter something that's not the proper input, we start to get an exception here, right? And in this case, we're getting an input mismatch exception. So this is where our exception handling can come into play so that we catch this and we can handle it properly. But now, what exceptions are there? If we actually go look at the documentation for the scanner class, you're going to see that for the particular method that we're trying to call here, it actually throws 3 separate exceptions. So you could catch each one of these individually and perhaps write out individual error messages, or you can just go ahead and catch exceptions as a whole, any exception that occurs, and then handle it from there. So we're going to use this try catch notation. Basically anything inside the try section is what we're wrapping with the exception handling. So if an exception occurs within that wrapped or scoped area, the catch is going to catch it, and then we're going to handle it in that section. So let's go ahead and run this as is, and we expect this to be working properly. We are doing the exception handling, but whoa, what's going on here? Well, I just wanted to show you a common bug that a lot of programmers run into when using the scanner class and reading different types of inputs, parsing them from the input stream. Basically, if you look at the documentation, when you use this nextInt function, if it does throw an exception, an input mismatch exception, then it doesn't erase that bad input that's on the input buffer. So you still have to get rid of that before you start attempting to read again. All right, so we're going to go ahead and use the reader to kind of just eat that up. And there you have it. We are now doing exception handling. We are handling any exceptions that occur in the try section. We can now do input validation on the inputs that the user is giving us, and we can have a nice, clean program.